All right, gentlemen. The Board of Legislative Committee will come to order. Roll call, please.
Dr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Spears?
Here.
Mr. Ingram?
Here.
All right. Are there any agenda items to be added? Hearing none. Approval of the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Do I need to read this?
I don't believe
Okay. All right. New business, planning and zoning issues. Ragsdale.
Dr. Rose, may I?
I'm sorry, yes.
The lion's share of this meeting is going to be the Emily Ragsdale show. This week will be her 6 months tomorrow. No, Thursday. And we're very pleased with the job she's doing.
Excellent.
And she has identified some issues in planning and zoning with the ordinance and in her department that could be better or could be modernized or made more efficient. So probably the lion's share of today is going to be, she's going to start addressing some of those issues. Then we have a check issue and a solid waste issue, and then we're going to talk about grass and weed orders. But we welcome Ms. Ragsdale to vote.
And while she's walking up there, I'll tell you that she was tasked with giving us a 90-day report after her first 90 days about things her observations, areas she thought she could improve the department, et cetera, and all the items you're going to hear about today are contained in that 90-day report.
Hi. So the first item agenda that I'm going to talk about is our solar ordinance. Nope, sorry, wrong one. So the certification for our Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals members. So right now, there's no required certification process for members of the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals. Both of these boards play a vital role in furthering development. They could hinder development. They help make sure that development is consistent with our comprehensive plan, which is a requirement for the state of Virginia. They make sure that any future development is not going to have an adverse effect on property owners within adjacent properties, within the same zoning districts or adjacent zoning districts. So it's really important for them to understand their roles and the impact that their decisions have on the county as a whole. So I'm proposing currently our Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals members are paid $200 per meeting, with the chairman making $250. So I'm proposing that if our members become certified through a certification process that we are working on developing in-house, and this is something that they could do here. They would not have to go anywhere and become certified. We would hold it locally, so there wouldn't be any cost to the county as far as travel and things like that. But it would give them the opportunity to become certified, and then if they achieve that certification and maintain it, they would receive that full $200 per meeting rate. If they do not become if they're not certified, or they allow their certification to expire, they would then drop to $100 per meeting. And this is just an incentive for them to get that certification so that they stay up to date on state code, they understand our local ordinance, and then what the impact of their decisions and things that they pass or deny.
So, Emily, we're actually doing B up there, if you haven't figured that out. So in your package,
oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. There's a recommendation and a motion in there that the board is so inclined, the commission is so inclined. It's on page 9 of the packet.
I have a couple of questions. So you said you're developing the training right now. Do you anticipate how long that training will take? Or will it be online, or do they have to come in person?
We would do it, we'd probably do it in person.
During the regular board meetings.
Right. So this would be probably before their meeting. It's something that they would have periodically. We're looking at possibly quarterly to maintain their certification. We're actually working with the VTA attorney They are gonna do a training for the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Planning Commission. You all would be welcome as well, in November. So that's kind of the initial training, and then from there, he's gonna take, it's gonna be a learning opportunity for him. So he's gonna kind of see that as a starting point of where our boards are, their knowledge level, and then he'll take that back, and that'll help him start developing this training, that will then roll out.
I'll say this, Mr. Davis and I both have served on the planning commission. Mr. Davis, have you ever thought about this?
Do I have thought about it?
Yes, sir.
I personally think it's outstanding because this gives incentive to the board members to become better informed, and plus two, gives you, to me, it's more of a uniform view with Ms. Ragsdale and with to me the going forward of the what is it, the our what is the term we use for the, you know, for the county? What is it? Comprehensive plan. Yes. So that far, to me, that far comes into far better clarity with a certain amount of certification. I think it's a great idea. I do. I think it's great. So.
Yes, I think it's an outstanding idea because, honestly, you know, we'll get appointed to a committee and being on the planning commission and may come on to it not knowing what the county ordinance or anything is. So I think it's very important that we get in tune, basically, with what the ordinances county says. I think some of our restrictions should increase. Not only, you know, we're talking about this training, but I think some of our restrictions should increase on some of these solar facilities, because I'm hearing still. I heard yesterday about a solar place that's been in for some time now, and the trees are still small, and we hadn't gone back and done anything. So I think, you know, it's a big deal for the people that's sitting in the, making the decisions, to really know what they're doing, instead of a lot of times looking like they don't have a clue what's, you know, what the comprehensive plan is. So I think you've done a good job. Yes, you have.
And in addition to that, too, having the opportunity to have that training done locally as opposed to having to go to Virginia Tech is definitely good. So I definitely concur.
Sure. Thank you too for that.
Just have one other thing. Have the other members of the BZA and the Planning Commission, are they aware of this yet?
So we're making them aware this month. So we're kind of trying to nail down some times with the attorney to make sure. So he finally cleared with me that in the November BZA meeting that he cleared his schedule before that. So he can be down here that day to make sure that he's available for the training, and we're going to require that members participate as well.
During the training process, because everybody has different schedules in the world we're in today, Mr. Smithman, can we record those meetings so if a member can't be present, they can get their certification by?
You're talking about the training sessions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And viewing it and signing an affidavit that they watch it from the beginning or whatever.
We can definitely look into that, and something that we would probably add to that is some type of follow-up quiz or something, just to make sure that that information was, you know, reviewed and then they understood.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely take that into consideration as part of this.
I mean, because these, obviously they want to participate in the community involvement, so, you know, they're not getting paid a lot, so it'd be nice if we made it flexible to, especially to working people.
And we've originally said the days of their meetings just to make it easier for them, since they know they're going to be there anyways, but we can be flexible and, you know, look at other days during the week or the month after working hours to accommodate them. We want to make sure that we can have as many people there as possible, so that we're not bringing the attorney down multiple times.
Well, I don't think we probably have the skill set and our technology department to have it so that you can't advance pages and stuff without being time synchronized, and, you know, you gotta be able to answer the questions, and you can't, you have to review it again and answer them. We probably don't have that capability, but we could work something else out, I would hope.
It's a great idea. I love what you just said. It reminded me of the motor safety course or gun courses and things like that. That would be a great goal for us to endeavor. And then we have something in the can that can be produced as needed instead of relying on a single individual. Makes good sense.
You said the days of the meeting, would it be, you know, the meeting started, regular meeting started at 7, would you do it like at 6 or something like that?
Probably.
Okay.
We talked about starting at 5:30 or 6.
Okay.
He doesn't recommend going over an hour and a half for the training. So that is what we discussed.
Nice we have it before this planning commission.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I have one more question. It just came. What are you going to do about maybe put the supervisor on the spot? What are you going to do about the supervisor that has an honorary position on that board? Do they have to go through the same certification program? Is that right?
We would.
Yeah.
We would ask that they do. They are a voting member, so we would ask that they also participate in that certification.
It's only fair.
Personally, Mr. Chairman, I love the idea.
Yes.
We rely so much on
Absolutely.
that committee. When it comes over and it's 7:08, we pretty much go right along with it. So, you know, having them be better educated only makes it easier on us to make our decisions.
Which what Mr. Davis said was, made me think more about the long line that you just said. But next January, there's a new member on this board, or any of us, when we have our appointees, the turnover there, versus recalling these folks, maybe have these videos, this training set up. That's going to happen. I mean, every year or two, new folks are in office.
Very good.
Good idea.
All right.
Very good.
It'd be beneficial for us, if you agree with this, there's a motion on page 9 that somebody could make.
Chairman, I make a motion to recommend the above proposed basic rate changes to planning commission and board of zoning appeals members to the full board at the board's October business meeting for potential adoption.
Second. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? All in favor?
Got a vote.
You got to vote on it.
Electronic, computer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right in front of us. There you go.
They fixed it.
They fixed it. You messed it up now. Bruce, reasonable.
All right.
You want to go back up and hit number 1, solar? This starts on page 5 of your board pack.
So as Mr. Dudley mentioned, we have about 15 solar projects that are at some phase in the process, whether we've just had internal discussions with staff and the company, and they haven't submitted a special use permit application or rezoning application all the way through construction has been completed. So with each solar project that's taken for a special use permit, it's been a learning process. So we have originally, they started up, we didn't have a lot of regulations in our zoning ordinance. So that was added into our zoning ordinance. And now as we move through this process, we've realized that these are actually very relaxed regulations. And so what tends to happen is we have our zoning ordinance, however, there's a lot of leeway between what our ordinance says and what is actually approved, because a lot of our regulations have to be put into conditions, that's the way our ordinance is written, or can be modified by conditions through the special use permit process. And this is from their decommissioning bond, whether or not we allow them to include salvage value, which if they include salvage value, a lot of times that reduces their decommissioning cost all the way down to a negative amount. So then you cannot hold a bond on a negative amount. So if we cannot enforce that and go back and try to make them take that salvage value out, they don't have an amount to hold a bond on. So then at the end of the life of the project, if their project is not decommissioned per their plan that they submitted to us, we don't have a lot to make them come back and remove those panels and the wire and things like that. Right now, the setback requirements are just based on their zoning district. So most of our projects are agricultural, so their side setbacks are 10% of the road frontage. However, the Board of Zoning Appeals has the ability to amend this through their conditions. So they could reduce it all the way down to basically nothing if they wanted to. So what happens is sometimes they're reduced for certain projects, they're not reduced for other projects. Some solar companies come in and offer increased setbacks when they border a residential property, others don't. So you have, depending on where you live and what solar facility you're up against, they could have been required to be 500 feet away from your house, or they could have been allowed to be 10 feet from your property line. We have a lot of inconsistencies that are allowed through these conditions. So some of the things that I'm proposing will help reduce these inconsistencies and set just across the board setback requirements. And then others will help regulate where these can go. Right now, we have no regulation other than zoning districts that help regulate where these solar facilities can be. So I'm proposing that we require them to be no more than 2 miles from an existing transmission line. What we're worried about happening is once all the land along these transmission lines fill up, they'll start branching out and trying to tie back into these. So we kind of want to keep them along these transmission lines so that we can help control how many there are across the county and where they pop up. We also want to put in our ordinance that they have to be at least 5 miles from any other solar facility. And this helps the residential properties in the area keep from having solar farms pop up all the way around their property. They may be completely surrounded by one project, but they won't have to worry about this project coming in and another project coming in right behind them, and then all of a sudden they're living in a sea of solar panels. We also want to restrict the density of panel coverage to no more than 70% of the entire area of the project. And that just ensures that there's adequate buffers, that they can't go in and completely cover a property from setback to setback with solar panels, stick up a minimum buffer. This kind of helps control how many of those panels we allow on the site. And then also make sure that we have a consistent setback, regardless of the zoning classification you're in or what you offer up as a condition when you come before the Board of Zoning Appeals. So no less than 150 feet from any property line. So that's your front, side, and rear setback. You have to be at least 150 feet off of those property lines. And then 200 feet from any residential property line that's outside of the project boundary. If you own a farm and you live on that farm, you're renting your property to the solar, we're not going to require you to be 200 feet from that residence. But if they're locating on a farm, there's a residential property next door, they need to be at least 200 feet off of that property line to ensure that there's adequate distance between residential properties in this use. We also, there's a landscape buffer section that we want to insert into the ordinance. Right now, that's done through their conditions. So a lot of times what happened with the projects that you're talking about with the small trees, we didn't have these regulations in place, and those were not put into conditions. So the trees are small, and because it's not one of their conditions, and there's nothing in our ordinance, we can't go back and make them change it. So this would require that trees are 6 feet tall at planting. Once they reach maturity, they're at least 15 feet tall. They have to be at least a 15-foot wide landscape buffer, staggered row, to ensure that there's no visible sight line through that landscape buffer. And it would also require that they fill in any existing vegetation with this 15-foot buffer. Other issues that we've run into in the past is their conditions only required them to put a landscape buffer along property lines where residential properties are. When really, it should be around the entire project site. So this is kind of cleaning that up. It's in our ordinance, and therefore it would not need to continue to be in condition, so therefore they wouldn't be able to offer a condition and have that changed. They would have to go through the variance process. And then finally, putting language in our ordinance that excludes salvage value from their decommissioning estimate so that we don't run into issues where they include it and we don't have an amount to hold a bond on. Is there any questions?
Like, you was discussing at the beginning, I think, it has to be within, how far from transmission?
So it would be 2 miles.
2
from
miles.
transmission,
Now,
existing transmission line.
Let me ask you this, are you talking transmission, are you talking distribution, or are you talking tap lines, utilities?
So
Transmission is the large ones that come off.
Right, so it would have to be a transmission,
Okay.
because what they do is they like to locate a substation right on that transmission line.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that's another issue that we run into, and it's not anything that's in our ordinance, but they like to put up substations as part of their project. Well, in these zoning districts, we require a special use permit for a substation. So technically, their substation is part of their project, therefore it needs to come down when their project is decommissioned, unless they have been granted a special use permit for that substation. So, that's nothing that you all need to do, but just kind of an FYI. It will need to be on a transmission line,
Okay.
and their substation will need to come down unless we grant them a special use permit to lift that up.
Covered all the grounds, I'll say.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. The project that was in Ringo originally, those trees were supposed to be 3 times as big as than they are, and that was a requirement that I had, that other than that, they weren't going to get it in my district. So that goes back to Jared Shock out there in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And so the soil, or whatever the reasons were, they've either replanted or whatever, I don't know, I lost sight of it, And the other thing, when it comes to decommissioning, I was of the opinion that we had it in writing that we weren't going to allow anybody, we're not going to decommission it. We're not going to salvage that stuff. That's supposed to be figured into the price. In fact, it's figured in the price over there in Ringo. And so how did we lose contact or lose the verbiage that should have been already established? Did we lose it going to the BZA? I was under the impression it's supposed to have been, that was our requirement. And so we lost it from somebody else that didn't push it through who was here before.
Mm-hmm. So what happens a lot of times when going back in my research, we have guidelines, and the guidelines all state that. However, the guidelines are just guidelines for staff. They're not in the ordinance. So the only way that we can enforce those guidelines are if they are put into their conditions. And so a lot of times, what would happen previously is staff would submit conditions from staff, going by their guidelines. The solar company would submit their own conditions, and then when BZA would make the recommendation, they would go with the conditions submitted by the applicant. And so then when we go back to enforce them, we have to enforce the conditions that were approved. So we're trying to put into our ordinance all these requirements so that we don't have to worry about those conditions, that we have a stringent ordinance that we can apply to make sure they're meeting all of our regulations. And then if need be, we can go back and apply further restrictions to them based on their location, et cetera, if it's necessary.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I remember us voting on bond requirement.
That's correct.
And the premise of it was to protect the county that once these things are decommissioned,
That bond covers the
that
decommission.
bond would be more than adequate in we even went as far as to say it had to be from an A or double A rated company type thing. And I think that's what Mr. Davis is speaking to. So I think what I heard you say in your presentation was due to the way they're able to depreciate or whatever, it lowers the value of those quantities so bad that they can't even secure a bond.
Correct. So they submit their decommissioning costs, which is required in our ordinance, and it has to be from a professional engineer. It has to be stamped stating how they came up with that figure, their timeline, etc. Nothing in our ordinance eliminates salvage value from being included. So when they go back and they include the amount of money that they can get from all their scrap metal, etc., and then it's so great that it reduces that amount to, most of the time, a very large negative number. It's not even close to being a positive number. And so there's nothing to issue a bond or a surety, other form of surety on. And so most of the time we go back and, I push that this is in violation of our ordinance because our ordinance requires that our Board of Zoning Appeals require a bond. And if you have a negative number, then you cannot hold a bond. There's nothing to issue a bond on. However, we want to make sure that this is clean and we don't have to go back and have these arguments with solar companies later. We want to make sure that up front they know.
Well, that was my understanding, maybe, that the surety bond requirement, in the event the surety bond went away, so did the solar farm at the same time.
Yeah.
You did have.
Greg, Mr. Sides had that separate sheet. You remember it had the bonding? What you're basically trying to do is bake that into our ordinance
Right,
now.
correct.
What they're saying is, there's information on there about the ratings of the bonding company. Do we need to just bake that in there as kind of the belts and suspenders approach into our ordinance so that nobody can claim? Because you can't condition away our ordinance.
Right.
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Yes, we can do that.
You know that you,
Yeah.
Okay, we can, when we advertise, we can suggest the additional.
We'll include that.
Well, I really appreciate the work you're doing to protect the county. Okay, I won't be here when all this comes to pass, but I'm glad you did.
It makes our job easier too.
Ms. Rector, how many current applications are in process?
So we don't have any current applications submitted currently. We have one, no, I take that back. We have one that was just submitted. It's a project in Axton that will actually, it's in both counties. So that one will go next month. And then we've had some that have called, and they ask a lot of questions, but they haven't submitted anything to us yet.
I was
So our total count, I think, is 13. Is that right?
I think we're at 15 now.
15.
That we've either spoken to or there's some point in the process.
Kimberly, the one you spoke about, is that permanent?
I have to go back and look. I don't know that I have that
But it
information.
splits Pittsylvania.
It does.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
But what I was getting at, I guess, would be, on your grandfather, or what I would hate for someone to start the application process, and we change the rules on.
So likely these would not go into effect until after they went, if they go to the beginning of November, likely these would not be adopted until, they would already been granted approval before you all, voted on, amending the ordinance.
So what, the application that's pending?
Correct. Any after that.
Negotiation, huh?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Once you apply, though, I won't protect that one.
Yes.
Just-
And so they would already have either gotten approval or been denied before this came before the entire board to be adopted.
I want to take care of that process.
Yeah, because depending on what I'm talking about, I hate that not to be treated fairly like the others.
And everything other than the setback requirements and then the transmission line and, panel density and being 5 miles from another, all of that we bake into the conditions submitted by staff. And so I have stopped including the conditions submitted by the, solar facility. because as you know, conditions, I mean, they don't have to accept the conditions. They either abide by the conditions or they don't do the project. And so I think it confuses the board when you submit those, and then they have them to compare. And a lot of times they'll try to slide stuff into the conditions that we don't want because we feel that it is either in violation of our ordinance or it doesn't allow us to protect the county's interest. So we stopped including that. So all the regulations that are in here that would apply to them, we try to apply to the others as well.
So that's already being done.
Mm-hmm. The conditions are, yeah.
And throughout the language that's in the document, still the current flow with this being approved would be planning commission, then BZA, no board supervisor.
No. The only way this would ever come before the board of supervisors is if you all decided to have special use permits come before you for approval.
Do we have any currently, just for general information, that are outside of the 2 mile radius? Transmission line?
I don't believe so. Most of them locate on the transmission line because it's cheaper for them to get direct access, and they try to locate close to existing substations. If they can't locate next to an existing substation or the substation will benefit them in the future, then they'll include the substation as their project.
Basically, these projects are self-regulating because they're going to get built up around the transmission line.
Yeah.
There is a type of solar where it stores the energy in batteries. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
That's what prevent those in the
Yeah,
future.
small.
There's more risk associated with them with leakage and all that stuff.
Right.
But
Chairman. I think it's fair also to let the board know that these companies are not always truthful with us, and they say they're going to do something and they do not do it. And I think this is one of the reasons that I think it's important for us to put something in concrete. That way they cannot push anything over us. I think it's very important. So
And that leads into my question, are there any other guidelines that you feel need to be added that you feel too stringent to throw out? As far as I'm concerned, if there's anything else that needs to be put in to protect the county, we should do it. I don't know if you've had any reservations about adding something that you felt would protect the county or not.
Nothing outside of what I proposed. This gives us a good solid foundation, and then we can always apply stricter regulations through conditions. But this at least sets a solid foundation and provides adequate protection for the county, and helps us better manage development from the get-go. And we don't have to worry about a condition eliminating something that we really would like to require. But we do have that opportunity to go back later if we need to.
also, I think we've said in some of the meetings where we try to appease the neighbors and appease the company, and you're not going to please them all. So with these restrictions and everything, that'll help us with that as well. So it's very important to do this.
Thank you, Ms. Ragsdale.
Good job.
So if the board likes what we just talked about, there's a motion on the bottom of page 5. We need to slightly amend it and just say, I make a motion to recommend the potential solar ordinance revisions as attached with the inclusion of the additional bonding language to the full board of the board's October business meeting for advertising for potential adoption at the board's November business meeting following the legally required public hearing.
I'd make that motion.
All right, is there a second?
I will second when it comes up.
Thank you.
All right, please cast your votes. All right, approved. Again, thank you, Ms. Ragsdale. All right, is Mr. Shorter?
She has 2 more items.
I'm sorry.
We're going to be at 5C, comp plan update, comprehensive plan.
Sorry about that, good.
Sorry. So state code requires us to submit a comprehensive plan or re-adopt a comprehensive plan every 5 years. Basically, our comprehensive plan has to be reviewed every 5 years. There was one that was adopted in 1991 when zoning was adopted, and then it was not updated until 2010. So the last full comprehensive update that we had was 2010. And through my research, I'm not even sure that that was a full update. I think it started out as an update, and then there were some issues, and so we ended up kind of piecing it together in-house and adopting it just so that we could meet those requirements from the state. It was then re-adopted in 2015, and we're currently up to re-adopt it again this year. Given the time where we are in the current year, we don't have time for a full revision, even though that's needed. So I will be doing an in-house review, and then asking that that be re-adopted so that we meet the state's requirements. However, I would like to propose, and this would be something that would come back before you in a future budget discussion, that we hire a consulting firm to come in and do a total overhaul of our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan is extremely important. A lot of our funding opportunities come through the comprehensive plan. A lot of things we have to ensure that they are in compliance with the comprehensive plan. So any of our rezoning cases, they have to be in compliance with our comprehensive plan. A lot of grants that we receive, this just doesn't take into development. It's businesses, it's transportation, it's parks and recreation. It's really a full overview of the county and provides a map for where we want to go and where we see ourselves in the future. So that's something that I would highly recommend as we move forward in future budget seasons, to look at how we can hire someone to do a complete overhaul of our comprehensive plan, so that we make sure that we have a clear vision for the future, and that we're including all of these projects that are going to come up in this comprehensive plan, so that when funding is available, we can say, yes, this has been identified in our comprehensive plan, yes, you should give us funding for this. So that's kind of just making you aware that will come up later.
So we're not seeking any action tonight, we're just putting this on your radar. And I'll say, the comprehensive plan touches every aspect of the county, from the service authority, to economic development, to planning, to zoning, parks and rec, grant funding, and we've fallen down on our job in the past by just rubber stamping it every year. So I don't know, this year we have to just approve it to meet the state guidelines, but just know you have to do it every 5 years, but it doesn't mean you can't do it sooner than that. So what we're putting on notice is that there likely will be money asked for in her budget going forward to get this done correctly once and for all. And this is not going to be a short process. It's going to require stakeholder meetings. It's going to require some consultant to meet everybody from businessmen to VDOT to economic development to foresters to ag people. And this gives you the blueprint for the next 20 years or wherever, about where growth should occur, where utilities should go, where economic development should be focused, where we want zoning things going and zoning not things going. And it's, if you have a good comprehensive plan, I've had one in places that I used to work, that thing doesn't just get dust on your shelf. You're constantly reaching for it, and it should focus your decision on most things you do. And we right now have a document that's just in the dinosaur years.
It's huge with development.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's okay for us to review our plan. So you adopt it 1 year, you have to review it 5 years. But the life of that plan should not exceed that 10-year mark. So every 10 years, you should be completely revamping your comprehensive plan to ensure that it is aligning with the future vision of the county, so that all of your development follows that as well.
All right, there's no action on this, so unless the board has any questions, you can go to the next item, which is about the zoning mass revision discussion.
And that kind of plays into the comprehensive plan. So basically, you should have a good, solid comprehensive plan that is your vision, and then your zoning ordinance should be the tools that you use to make sure that that's being implemented. Our current zoning ordinance, as I said, was adopted in '91. We have not had any mass revision or update since then, so a lot of trends in development have changed. A lot of trends in the county have changed. And so what we're finding is there are a lot of holes in our ordinance. So when we go to enforce something, we can enforce it, but there are 10 exceptions to the rule. So that does not make it easy for us to do our job. And it doesn't really help drive the comprehensive plan either. So I'm proposing that after we do our comprehensive plan update, that we look at doing a total revision of our zoning ordinance. And this is a long drawn out process. There's a lot of stakeholder meetings, there's a lot of public input, because this would look at every zoning classification that we have and ensure that the uses within that zoning classification, we want to continue allowing those uses. That those uses are clearly defined, so that when someone comes into our office and they say, I want to open X, Y, and Z, that we can say either it's allowed or it's not allowed, and it's a very black and white process, because that's how zoning should be. There should be really no gray areas. And what we run into is there are uses listed under our use categories, but we don't have definitions for them. So I have to make a determination as the zoning administrator. However, if someone were to press that issue or appeal my decision, sometimes I don't have a lot to stand on because there are no clear definitions, and we don't want that moving forward. So this would be something else that after we get through with our comprehensive plan update, that we look at hiring someone to come in and help guide us through this complete revision of our zoning ordinance. And then after that, staff would be able to manage updates, and we would review it yearly to make sure that current trends are still being applied. We could make any amendments that we needed to, but we wouldn't need this full overhaul in the future. We can manage and update it better.
And it's definitely needed. Anybody who's sat through any planning and zoning training, and I've sat through tens of 20s of hours with Mike Chandler, Virginia Tech, and all and his philosophy is if you have more than about 2 of the same rezonings per year, it's not your citizens' fault, it's your ordinance is incorrect. And I'd say 90% of our rezonings are from R1 to A1 to allow for somebody to have basically a residential use in agricultural zone land. They don't want a full-blown farm, but they want incidental agriculture. That's clearly a problem with our ordinance. We shouldn't be requiring our citizens to jump through all these hoops. We need to contemplate being progressive and flexible. There's got to be some. There's probably going to be a suggestion of some, subsection of R1 to allow ag stuff or A1 to allow our stuff. There's a lot of examples of stuff that we're just not using our words as efficiently as we can. Also, if you get an outsider in here that does a good job, it's going to be a highly political process, because you're going to have everybody from developers who want to keep the quarter-acre lots to put up small houses to people who want larger lot sizes to prevent that. So it's going to be ripe with controversy and some politics, and if you do it correctly and hire the right person, you can take a lot of that anger and vindictiveness and ugliness out of it and have some more objective discussions about the future of zoning.
And additionally, once the code is rewritten, there may be some new zoning districts that are proposed and things like that. So we would have to then go back and map this. And what was done in '91, and which has caused a lot of issues for us, was it was mapped based on the use of the property. There was no comprehensive vision for what the use of that area should be. So you have residential, and then you have a B2 stuck in the middle of that residential, or vice versa. And so, we run into that a lot of times where that's really not, that use doesn't fit in with the nature of that area. But because that's how the zoning ordinance was mapped, that's what we run into. So this would kind of help us clean that up as well. So as they said, it probably would get very political because you will have zoning changes to property. So this is going to be a long, drawn-out process, and it's not going to be an easy process, but it's one that we do need to tackle if we want to move forward.
So we're just putting it on the radar, there's no action for this.
Yeah. We've run into some of the situations where she just said, you have a neighborhood, and then you have a guy that's got a garage here, wants to run a shop, and on the backside, he's connected with a highway that does have business, and that would help a lot, so, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a statement to make. I love the way you talk, and I'm enjoying every bit of it. The only problem is, you're showing us just how far we've been out of compliance for a while. Mr. Warren, you were correct in your analysis over a year ago. So, so my question to you is, how long is it going to take us to really, instead of you keep pulling, showing all this dust that's been hanging on the books for so long that we're not grabbing after all, should have been. How far are we out? I better not ask that question. How long will it take for us to get within the proper range where we really need to be? Just a guess.
Well,
maybe a year?
Probably longer than that, because if we were to start this comprehensive plan update, because you really want to do that first so that you know what your end result should be. That is, probably a year process for them to do a good, solid, comprehensive plan update. And then once that's done, then we could start this overhaul, and that's probably at least 18 months, I would imagine, for that process from start to finish. Yeah.
Well, I know this definitely goes without saying, but when we really get to the point of wanting to redo the comprehensive plan, I would certainly want to advocate that we have as much public participation from all sectors of the community as possible.
I agree, and that would be our overall goal, because we want to make sure that all of those sectors and all of those stakeholders are included in this, so that it covers our county and really paints a clear picture of our county makeup, and then the visions for the different areas of our county as well.
One other statement, Mr. Chairman, is that I like serendipities, so I think that you may have the answer to our past setback problems. You may have it within the workings. Hopefully we've got a little bit of buoyancy in here.
We've identified the problems that have led us to this place in time, and it's called the lumpy road syndrome. When you find something you don't like, you sweep it under the rug. And she's going around pulling up all of our roads.
I do understand that, but my question to you, Mr. County Administrator, where have you been the last 4 years?
It's 3.5 years, and that's why we hired him.
Well, let's go to eat.
We do need to move on.
Emily's doing a wonderful job too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. You think we can handle the next 2 as a single item?
I can do this one in a minute if you listen to me, and then let's do them separate real quick. All right, Mr. Shore is supposed to be here, but he's not, so I'll take it. The next item is, Mr. Shore is currently handling the billings for the Service Authority. And what he's run into is that our county code charges $35 for all return checks, and the PCSA charges $45 for all return checks. Virginia Code Section 15.2106 allows localities to charge up to $50 per return check. All Mr. Short is asking is that you authorize him to have a public hearing in November, which just brings the county's return check fee, which is currently $35, in line with the PCSA's check fee, return check fee, which is $45. So he just wants to raise it $10 to have it uniform across the board. Does the board have any issues with advertising for that?
All right.
If not, just read the motion, please, that's on page 12 of your packet.
Right. If somebody will make a motion.
Just have one question. I guess we have to wait for Mr. Shorter. What's the normal cost for return?
Well, I emailed him that, and he's going to get me that information. So you're going to have a public hearing on this. So I will have you that information prior to that public hearing, what his true costs are for return checks. I'm sure what you're going to find out is some costs very little and some little. Very expensive to try to track down.
I make a motion to recommend the attached revision to PCC 6-6.6 to the full board. The board's October business meeting for advertisement, potential adoption of the board's November business meeting following the legally required public hearing.
Is there a second?
Chairman, I have a little piece of discussion. Maybe can you also get what the average number of return checks we get? It seems like a lot of that would be eliminated if we were taking credit cards and debit cards. Seems like we are centuries behind time. We need to get update.
For example.
What we get in the motion?
Please.
I'll add that she can.
Okay.
All in favor? Three approved. Mr. Pitts.
What is up there? The storms
Feel like it.
Mr. Pitts.
Okay, I'll start with if, let's see, if we bill you for solid waste disposal, you don't pay the bill, or if you decide to pay it 30 days, 60 days, or 120 days, after you take, we currently, we're not charging you interest. And we'd like to ask the board to change our current ordinance, where if the bill's already paid, we can't charge interest on that account.
Let's be clear, this is not your solid waste disposal fee, this is going over the scales, this is your tipping fee.
The contractors, businesses.
What we're finding out is we actually had a collections case last Friday, is when somebody goes over the tipping fee, the scale, and doesn't pay, within 30 days, we bill them. If they don't pay, we have to try to get a judgment and collect. And there's no interest that currently runs on those delinquent accounts. The state code allows a locality to charge up to 10%, so we're just asking 10% collection fee. Now, a secondary discussion, maybe for another time, is what I've talked to Mr. Warren. Mr. Warren alluded to. This maybe could be eliminated by making somebody swipe a credit card when they go over tipping, go at the scale house. I think there's some technological issues, there's some auditing issues, but we tend to agree that an organization of our size that has a budget of what, 280 million, or is it 180? 180. We should be modern enough to be embracing Apple Pay or credit card pay, or there seems to be, unless someone gives you a hot credit card, there seems to be very little risk of making somebody swipe, or at least make a requirement to get an application to use our landfill, and then put up some kind of, credit card on file. So that's all we're seeking, is the ability to start charging up to 10% interest on these delinquent tipping fee accounts. And if that's in line with what the board wants to do, there's a motion on the bottom of page 14.
We'll entertain a motion.
Chairman, I make a motion that recommend the attached revision to PCC 17-4C to the full board, the authorization to advertise the same for potential adoption on the legally required public hearing in the board's November business.
Second.
Sir, second.
Cast your votes. Motion is approved. All right, old business, Mr. Ingram.
Yes, sir. Well, I'll preface this and I'll throw it over to Mr. Ingram. We've talked about grass and weed ordinance several times in the past, and I've actually attached those minutes. And if you remember last time we talked, we took no action on it, but we asked about there was asked about the possibility of adopting grass and weed ordinance in certain districts or certain R1 zoned areas, or possibly certain R1 zone areas that are a certain size. All those are possible. Mr. Ingram has asked again to discuss this, and so we put it on the agenda. So I'll throw this over to Mr. Ingram for discussion.
Thank you, sir. You gentlemen see a picture I provided for you. This is a house in the Western Pines area, and it has been an eyesore for ages. And I took this back just a couple of months ago, and you can see the grass in itself, probably close to 24 inches, well over what the statute talks about. But the house is owned by a gentleman that lives in Roanoke. He absolutely refuses to do anything. Part of this roof is now covered with a blue tarp. He has an abandoned vehicle in the driveway. And it's just a shame because all the residents, and this is where the late Sheriff Harold Plaster lived, has to drive by this every single day. So looking at State Code 15.2, 121, or 1215 rather, as well as 15.2.901, if we would adopt an ordinance by authorization of state code, it would give us some teeth to do something about places like this. And I do know the hazards about passing this collectively, but if we did nothing but said for residential areas, I think that would give us something more than we have now. And there's another area up at Cascade I don't have pictures of, almost as bad as this, but the front yard is full of trash. And so 15.2.901 would give us some authority to clean up that mess, which is not only a sight sore, but it's a health issue as well. So I'd love to see us entertain the possibility of making an ordinance based on the state code to give us some leverage with eyesores like this. It's like Ms. Ragsdale said, this has been going on for years. I read some of the history of it, and I do realize there's places somewhat in a secluded part of the county that may have an abundance of abandoned vehicles, motors, you name it. But if we just look mainly at the residential areas, that would be better than done. Thank you, sir.
All right. I think you can do something about the trash.
You can do something about the trash, but we don't have a grass and weed. That's
the reason I'm saying, we got one in Grit, and nobody ever addressed it. Nobody ever went there and said anything to them. I put Karen Hayes on it, and within 2 months, it was clean. And I'm telling you.
I'm not sure about that one. The one about the trash, it speaks of no such ordinance adopted by the county shall have any force and effect within corporate limits of any town.
Those are.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Paul's history, but I spoke to this many times because we have, in the district I represent, we have quite a few subdivisions that I certainly would advocate for this practice because, it's important in a subdivision when somebody buys in there, and, you can have covenants, but when you got covenants, it becomes an individual's thing, and then you end up dividing neighbors and everything else. So, having something that is subdivision related, I don't know if this one is in a subdivision.
It is.
I think if we could get some wording that said for subdivisions, I would defer to Ms. Ragsdale to do some studying on this, but, to me, we need to advance the county. I keep thinking back to look how long it took us to rectify a major issue on Mount Crossroad because we didn't have anything that really had any teeth. It shouldn't take years to clean up the trash.
Mr. Chairman, I understand the intent, and I'm having a hard time coming up with a definition that meets everyone's intent. If we do it just in residentially zoned areas, you're going to pull in lots that are 20 acres that have a house on it that are farming on, and it would be against your intent. If it was just in residential districts, if you're just in subdivisions, I'm afraid you would leave out people like me. I don't think my street would be, quote, a subdivision, but it's certainly R1, and the lots are of sufficient density and size that it should be enforced in that type of area. There might be a combination of the two. For instance, it applies to lots in R1 areas that are less than a certain acreage. You know, most R1 lots are an acre or less. You might want to make it 2 or 3 acres or less. And then my final comment, which is, I think should be the one on the top of our minds, is we do not have the staff to police this thing countywide. This would be a tiger by the tail for us to patrol 1,000 square miles.
Mr. Chairman, I have one little bit of input. What if, I think we need to do something. But we're working on a new comprehensive plan, new stuff. What if we implemented a pilot program that said 2 acres for a period of time? Anything 2 acres. And I don't care, yeah, I don't care if you make it, you know, if you single out a district, you're going to do it in to eliminate the manpower. So we can get a test case to see really how it works, and then we'll know what we want to include in the revisions that we made following the comprehensive plan. I'm just food for thought.
Well, your density issue, your areas with the highest density, which in the top of my mind is Mount Herman, but I know there are many, many others. You know, those are where this is probably the highest.
That's where my mind was going, would be coming up with a formula of number of dwellings within a square mile, within acres, within something that would help cover not just would be 14 or 15 houses within a X amount of square. The high density areas, I agree.
Just make it the proximity around the house, say a 200 or 300 buffer around a facility. That way, if they have acres they're using for farming, you only worry about what's around the house. That's where you're going to have the health issues with snakes and rats and whatever. So maybe just make it a buffer zone around the facility in an R1 district, and then that'll eliminate having
most localities limit to R1, and then they put a cap on the lot size as it applies to. But I guess you could do the buffer around the dwelling. You have some people who grow tobacco right up to the back door, so there had to be some kind of ag exception. And then you're going to get people saying all those beautiful weeds and stuff, I'm growing that as hay for my animals. So we can, Emily and I can go to the drawing board and propose something and bring it right back to you. And I like the pilot program idea, because if you did for 6 months or a year, you could be able to extrapolate those costs about what we would need in the future.
We need to walk before we run on this one, or we could, you know, so if there's a certain area or a district or 2 or 3 that we started in, and I like the idea of the cap on the lot size more than the buffer thing because of what David just brought up. Most people aren't going to be growing tobacco.
I promise you, no matter what decision you make, we cannot please them all. That's just promise.
Mr. Ingram.
2 things. First of all, if we move forward by making this an ordinance, what's the enforcement process? Could it not fall back to the sheriff's office or fall in another department? I know the city of Danville, they have a similar ordinance by which the police department can enforce it, but primarily buildings or grounds or some department takes care of it. The second thing is a county employee or a city employee can drive by, spot this, report it, and you can take care of the enforcement by way of a registered letter.
Right.
The enforcement, you know, we did this for people that complain about dogs. You know, certain communities that have a dog ordinance, so it's the same situation. If you complain about dogs or weeds, you got to enforce it. So, you know, maybe by looking at that, maybe the respective community could petition, just like they did with the dog ordinance. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I guess you could do that, make it like a 51% of the people in a defined area could say they want to have a grass and weed ordinance. But the problem is,
You're hanging out 49% of the people.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I personally, I like putting some kind of verbiage in there, 2-acre residential lots. I've always advocated for weed and grass ordinances. I think I think we have some obligation to protect our citizens that want to keep their homes up versus ones that don't.
Most ways that this is enforced is, the first step would be a certified letter. Your grass is X number, you need to cut it within 30 days. Most of the people don't do it. And then you go cut it with either we sub it out to a landscaper, a team of landscapers, or we do it ourselves. And then you assess a value to the services that you provided, and then I go and file a lien against the property. So it's a long game. You usually get your money back when the property turns over, just like tax liens. They have to come current to that before the property closes. So it's a long game. I mean, you're going to put money out and not get money back in until later.
And most time we come up short.
Most time come up short.
So do we want to, would you guys like for us to propose something and talk about it at your next work session? Put some kind of proposal on the table? I mean, we're here, we're understanding the intent. We just need to figure out the best way to author it and enforce it.
Do you have a reaction, Mr. Ingram?
I'm sorry, see.
Do you have a reaction to the?
Oh, no, sir, I agree with you, absolutely.
Let us put our heads together. Other localities have different versions of this, and we'll present something to the board, this work session next, and let y'all see if we're barking up the right direction.
Can we get some public input on this?
Well, you're gonna have to. If you adopt something, you're gonna have to have public hearing for it.
So I do want to ask one final question. The statute says you cannot exceed a fine of $100, but I told you about this duplex in the city of Dallas that was donated to the Kansas Association. And when the city went and cut the grass, they charged us almost $400 per pop. We got popped twice. No mercy. So how can they jack up the penalty? And we couldn't.
Because if you look at 15.2901, if you look at C, it says the governing body is $50 for the first violation, and then for the second violation is $200, and you actually can charge people up to $3,000 to cut their grass within a 12-month period. So that's how you probably got popped.
You're talking about 901?
Yeah.
I got you.
Okay, that's all I've got. We ran 5 minutes over, but I think it was good. We'll bring something back to you. You can entertain a motion to adjourn if you think it's appropriate.
All right, are there any matters from the committee members? If not, motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Yes, sir. So moved.
All in favor?